So issue severity level, this tells you how severe your cases are. So this has stayed pretty stable, probably because it's such a big data set and the way the lines are used. It stayed pretty stable at about 80%. It dropped a little bit down to 83% last year. But where we saw a shift was in the severe. So this is all the regular calls, the non-severe calls. Here are all the severe, and these are split between urgent and non-urgent. And we saw a decent jump in the urgent calls that was largely COVID driven. Talk to us a little bit about some of these shifts and what folks should be looking at in the context of their own severity proportions from year to year.
Yeah, there's an interesting dynamic here, right? Because if you just look at, I got 150 reports last year. I think we all know that the way risk management works is your risk wasn't evenly split across all 150 of those reports, right? You might have had 80% of your risk in 6 reports in the severe area.
Right.
So this is an important metric to start following the breadcrumbs and figuring out what's going on in your organization, right? If this spikes, if your severity rate spikes in a year, then you want to investigate it. If your severity rate is especially lower than this, you might be wondering, hey, are we not finding out about the important issues?
Right.
So, I think we saw an increase in the urgent last year, largely due to COVID, right? Like things were moving quickly, changes were happening quickly. There was a lot more uncertainty. And, I think we talked in the last session about that safety and environmental piece of if someone says, hey, someone's at work and I think they just got exposed, or, someone's refusing to, wear protective equipment or whatever it is. Those are things that would drive probably a severe and urgent. So I think those are some of the things that we saw kind of move the needle on this. But like we said, it stayed pretty stable at about 80% in kind of the normal range and about 20% in this severe, urgent, and non-urgent.
So big deviations from this type of a trend or big pops from year to year that seem to have stabilized at a new level in your organization, we would recommend that you dive in and look at a few different areas. So the first one is just dial in and understand how your line is used. Is the scope too limited? Is it too wide? Where are you at with that? Once you get past that, start looking at your directives. How are you directing intake to handle your calls and categorize them on the severity axis? We had a case where someone had so many severity calls and they were like, what's going on here? And we dialed in and we saw their definitions for severity needed to change because their business had changed or whatever.
Right.
Beyond that, if your severe calls have been elevated to a new level and it's not anecdotal and you can't point to, it's usually an indication of a true risk, like a true systemic risk in operations, in which case you can help by making sure the people who are over that particular area are notified, they can fix that risk, and you can follow up on the back end with new policy, new training to support it, whatever.
Yeah. If you're getting more severe issues, it might be more severe things happening, or it might be people are opening up and starting to report that more. But in either case, you can do things with your intake to help facilitate that better. Right. That's get good information on the front end. That is, make sure that, like Nick said, you're using directives and saying, hey, if this question comes up, let's ask this question. If this issue or this person is mentioned, let's send it here. Mm-hmm. And then on that routing, are you getting immediate notification if something urgent is happening? Are these going to the right person through automation of workflows within your case management system, or are they going to someone's inbox and when they get a chance, they go kind of build them out? So those kind of process things can help you kind of get more clarity and interpret the severity rate. And it can also flow into your issue days open, where you're getting the urgent things closed out more quickly, or at least addressed and adjudicated a little bit. Because again, as we started out saying, a bunch of your risk is going to be in this kind of 15 to 20% here.
That's right.
All right, issue validity. Okay, so this is a question of something was reported, can I substantiate it or not? So that's obviously not a full determination of whether it was legitimate. It's just, do I have the information? Can I investigate it and find out what's going on there? So talk to us about kind of the stability of this trend and how it compares to the traditional comparison.
So historically, this has been pretty stable at kind of 65-35%, going back several years. We saw a pretty decent change in the substantiation rate last year, and this was one of the metrics that was hit hardest by the work from home dynamic. Mm-hmm. So we saw intake channel for in-office obviously collapse. A lot of those are more highly correlated with a substantiatable type of issue. So more of those unsubstantiatable calls, which you're always going to have a mix of, were coming through the other existing channels. And I think that was the big driver for this decline from kind of 65 area down to kind of 58%, 57.
Yeah. So I think there were also there was the thing that, people are not around each other as much. It's harder to find a witness and find some way to verify that this thing happened, right? Because everyone's kind of sitting on their couch on a Zoom call or whatever. So there was that. I think there were also a lot of new types of issues popping up, right? Like we haven't investigated, like I'm sure most companies hadn't investigated a protective equipment, a PPP, PPE claim before, so like there was new stuff coming up that we had to figure out, hey, like, is this whole category even something I can prove? Or, they walked out of the building and I can't tell if they were wearing a mask that day.
Right.
So I think those things impacted this. I think we'll see next year. Stay tuned. If this kind of levels out back to where we saw it before, and it, that would indicate that it was a 2020 pandemic, work from home type thing, or if this is a trend.
Yeah. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to the information that you're gathering on the front end, particularly with reporters that you never get an opportunity to talk to again because they're anonymous, because of whatever. So getting that good information on the front end will help inform the investigators which rocks they need to look under to find the grubs.
Yeah. You want the grubs.
Yeah.
All right. Issue sequence. This is an interesting one, right? This is saying out of all my reports, how many of those reports needed follow-up? Had an additional report come in about it. And the way I think of it is you're going to have follow-ups for a few different reasons, right? It may be just that something happens again, right? If someone says that this person was violent or threatening someone in the workplace and 2 days later it happens again, well, you want that follow-up report, right? So that's a good one. Sometimes it's going to happen on the other end where you haven't followed up with anybody. It's 6 weeks later and they say, hey, I'm still dealing with the same problem. I continue to get discriminated against. Where are you guys? That would be a bad result of a follow-up. So as with all of this, there's nuance that you want to dig into. But seeing your proportion of how many of your issues were complex enough or handled well enough or just ongoing enough to drive a follow-up is a question that you want to ask and something that you want to benchmark to yourself over time and also see how that compares to the broader market.
Yeah, so a quick hint on where to find or where to start looking for breadcrumbs is look at your issue days open. If you've seen a pop in your follow-up call rate and you don't see a commensurate pop in your issue days open, where would you tell people to look? Those two tend to move together.
Yeah, so you're saying if
follow-ups pop, and I don't have a commensurate pop in issue days open, or I don't see a significant shift in my distribution of open cases, what else would you tell folks to do?
Yeah, so I think you want to look at, I think you can look at your severities, right? So am I getting less severe issues, right? So these are simpler issues that are easy to close out. I don't need to investigate it that long. I'm just getting a different mix of issues. And you also might want to look at it might be a good thing, right? It might be that we've made improvements to our process and we're getting engagement in the process, but we're still closing those things faster.
Yeah. And another reason you can get that pop is perhaps you're getting into a new portion of the bell curve of workforce who are now engaging with the hotline and they're feeling it out a little bit. That should hopefully be short because you're following back up with them. They're getting to feel the sort of safety of this reporting channel. So that should be just like a temporary increase.
Yeah. And you might see that in your total number of issues per 100 employee going up, right? There are some,
that's a good point.
There's this adoption curve of some people are, very conscientious and always going to say something because, that's kind of in their DNA. And then some people they need to get a little bit more comfortable with as you kind of get into the middle of that bell curve and most of our population is looking out for this stuff and engaging. You should see, you could see that indication come in. We're getting more reports per 100 employees and we're seeing that show up in our sequence of follow-ups and our issue days open.